Thunder rumbled outside Courtroom 7B as Monica Thompson stood before the bench, her designer blazer concealing a shoulder holster, while Judge William Preston, better known as Hanging Harry among local attorneys, made a show of slowly polishing his glasses. The packed gallery behind her buzzed with anticipation, as this was the judge's notorious morning traffic court session, where he often reduced law students and sophomores to tears. The morning had started like any other at the Jefferson County Courthouse, with a line of anxious citizens stretching down the marble hallway, each clutching their citations like lifelines as they waited for their chance to face the infamous Judge Preston, whose reputation for humiliating traffic offenders had become something of a local legend, especially among the minority community. Monica had arrived precisely 45 minutes early, dressed in a tailored navy Armani blazer and matching pencil skirt, her appearance deliberately understated yet exuding quiet authority that made several fellow citizens in line step back unconsciously to give her space. The weight of her concealed USSS badge and service weapon, a constant reminder of her true identity, as she observed the courthouse security protocols with professional interest. The ancient courthouse building groaned under the assault of the approaching storm, its weathered brick exterior and towering columns standing defiant against the darkening sky, while inside the tension in Courtroom 7B built with each passing case as Judge Preston systematically dismantled every excuse and explanation offered by the parade of unfortunate citizens before him. Lightning flashed through the bulletproof windows, casting harsh shadows across the judge's bench, where Preston sat like an emperor on his throne, his black robe meticulously pressed, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, and his Harvard law ring prominently displayed as he gestured dismissively at each defendant, his signet ring catching the fluorescent light with every theatrical wave of his hand. The collection of people filling the gallery benches represented a cross-section of the city, from students in wrinkled clothes to business professionals checking expensive watches, while young attorneys observed the proceedings, taking mental notes on the judge's mannerisms and preferences for future reference, their nervous energy adding to the electric atmosphere. Court officers flanked the room, their expressions carefully neutral as they watched the proceedings. One veteran bailiff, Thomas Anderson, who had served in this courtroom for over 2 decades, noticed something different about Monica, something in her bearing that set her apart from the usual parade of traffic offenders, but he kept his observations to himself as he maintained his professional vigilance. A young law clerk scurried back and forth behind the bench, delivering files and whispering updates to the judge, her fresh face betraying her recent graduation and her obvious admiration for Preston, making her complicit in his daily performances of judicial superiority, while the court reporter typed, steadily recording every word of the morning's proceedings, her fingers dancing across the stenotech machine with mechanical precision. The air conditioning system hummed overhead, fighting a losing battle against the humidity that seeped in through the building's old bones, creating a thick atmosphere that matched the heavy tension building in the room as Monica observed each case before hers, noting the judge's increasingly theatrical displays of condescension and the growing discomfort among the observers. Time seemed to slow as the clerk finally called her name, Monica Thompson versus the state, the words echoing off the ornate ceiling as she stepped forward, her heels clicking purposefully against the worn marble floor, her training allowing her to simultaneously monitor every exit, evaluate each person in the room, and maintain an outwardly calm demeanor as she prepared to face the man who had built his reputation on breaking down people like her, or so he thought. The ghost of a smile played at the corners of her mouth as she took her position before the bench, her mind already several steps ahead, anticipating the judge's routine, while behind her the gallery shifted and settled in for what they assumed would be another entertaining display of judicial wit at the expense of yet another traffic offender. But Monica Thompson was about to rewrite their expectations in ways none of them could imagine. Judge Preston raised a theatrical eyebrow as he studied the ticket, his steel gray eyes flickering between the document and Monica with growing amusement, while his law clerk stifled a knowing grin. The morning sunlight, streaming through bulletproof windows, caught the unique signet ring on the judge's right hand, a reminder of his powerful family legacy that he lorded over everyone who entered his domain. The weight of generations of Preston judges seemed to hover in the air around him as he adjusted his position on the elevated leather chair, a piece of furniture that had seated 3 generations of his family before him, each Preston adding their own marks to its worn armrests, while dispensing their particular brand of justice from this very spot in Courtroom 7B. His clerk, Sarah Matthews, fresh from Yale Law School and already learning to mirror his mannerisms, stood slightly behind his right shoulder, her designer glasses and perfectly pressed suit reflecting her desperate desire to earn a prestigious judicial clerkship recommendation, though her slight wince at his more dramatic flourishes betrayed traces of a conscience not yet fully hardened by ambition. Thunder crashed outside as Preston made a deliberate show of scrutinizing the ticket, holding it at various angles beneath the antique brass desk lamp that had illuminated judicial decisions in this courtroom since 1922, the gathered observers leaning forward slightly in anticipation of his upcoming performance, a routine that had earned him both notoriety and a peculiar form of local celebrity. The veteran court reporter Gladys Wilson, who had transcribed 40 years' worth of judicial proceedings, rolled her eyes imperceptibly as she prepared to record another episode of what the courthouse staff privately called the Preston Show, her arthritis-twisted fingers hovering over the stenotype keys while she exchanged knowing glances with Bailiff Anderson. Behind Monica, the gallery had grown even more crowded as word spread through the courthouse grapevine that Hanging Harry had an interesting case before him, young clerks from other courtrooms finding excuses to slip in while maintaining unconvincing expressions of professional interest, their smartphones ready to capture any particularly memorable moments for the unofficial courthouse group chat. Preston allowed the silence to stretch dramatically as he examined the citation date, letting the tension build in his courtroom like a conductor preparing his orchestra, his carefully manicured fingers drumming a slow rhythm on his mahogany bench, while he occasionally glanced at Monica over his reading glasses, studying her composed demeanor with growing interest. The morning heat continued to build despite the struggling air conditioning system, creating a thick atmosphere that wrapped around the inhabitants of Courtroom 7B like a heavy blanket, while outside the storm clouds gathered darker and more ominous, perfectly matching the theatrical mood Preston was cultivating with each passing moment. Sarah Matthews efficiently sorted through additional documents related to the case, her movements deliberately synchronized with her mentor's theatrical pauses, as she had learned to do during her months serving as his clerk, though her eyes betrayed a flash of surprise as she noted unusual details in Monica's paperwork, details she wished she could bring to the judge's attention before he proceeded with his usual routine. Bailiff Anderson shifted his weight slightly as he observed the scene, his decades of experience allowing him to sense subtle changes in the courtroom's atmosphere, like a sailor feeling a shift in the wind, his hand unconsciously moving closer to his weapon as he noticed something different about this particular defendant, something in her bearing that sent his well-honed instincts into high alert. The sound of distant thunder punctuated the silence as Preston finally set down the ticket, adjusting his bow tie, a Preston family tradition dating back to his grandfather's time on the bench, while his eyes gleamed with the anticipation of another opportunity to demonstrate his wit and authority to his captive audience, completely unaware that he was about to encounter something entirely outside his carefully constructed world of judicial theatre. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees as Judge Preston leaned forward, speaking in an absurdly slow, patronizing drawl. "Now, honey bunch, do you need me to explain what a speed limit sign looks like?" Several observers snickered, while others squirmed uncomfortably in their seats as Monica stood unflinching, her expression unreadable, as she watched the judge perform his routine. A heavy silence fell over Courtroom 7B, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the soft whir of the ancient ceiling fans, as Preston savored the moment like a gourmand sampling a fine wine, his carefully cultivated accent becoming more pronounced with each syllable as he continued his performance. "Honey, do you understand that those big numbers on the sign tell you how fast you're allowed to drive?" His voice dripping with manufactured concern. Sarah Matthews, the young clerk, shifted uncomfortably behind the bench, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the stack of case files. Something about this particular defendant's demeanor making her increasingly nervous, though she maintained her practiced professional smile while stealing glances at the gathering storm clouds outside as if seeking an escape from the growing tension. The gallery had become a study in contrasting reactions, as some observers, particularly the regulars who came specifically to watch Preston in action, tried to suppress their laughter, while others, particularly minority members of the audience, stared straight ahead, their faces masks of carefully controlled emotion, having witnessed or experienced similar treatment in this very courtroom. Bailiff Anderson, a Vietnam veteran whose instincts had saved his life countless times in the jungle, felt the hair on the back of his neck rise as he watched Monica, her stillness reminding him of a coiled spring, or more accurately, a highly trained operator waiting for the precise moment to act, his right hand unconsciously moving closer to his service weapon. A flash of lightning illuminated the courtroom through the bulletproof windows, casting harsh shadows across Preston's face as he continued his theatrical performance. Now, sweet pea, I know numbers can be mighty confusing, especially those big ones. We put on those shiny signs, his exaggerated gestures becoming more pronounced as he warmed to his topic, completely blind to the dangerous waters into which he was sailing. Ladies Wilson, the veteran court reporter, had transcribed thousands of Judge Preston's performances over the years, but something about this one made her fingers hesitate over her stenotype machine, her experienced eyes noting subtle details that the judge seemed to be missing: the defendant's perfect posture, the way she managed to simultaneously appear relaxed yet ready, the calculated patience with which she absorbed each condescending word. The old courthouse walls seemed to hold their breath as Preston reached the crescendo of his performance. Maybe we should get you one of those pretty picture books that explain traffic signs. His voice, now so exaggerated it bordered on parody, while he preened before his audience like a peacock displaying its feathers, completely unaware of the proverbial sword hanging over his head. Monica remained still throughout the judge's monologue, her eyes never leaving his face as she categorized and filed away every gesture, every nuance, every overplayed syllable, her CIA-trained mind analyzing multiple scenarios and outcomes while maintaining an exterior calm that was beginning to unnerve the more observant members of the courtroom. Sarah Matthews frantically flipped through the case files, having finally noticed something in the documentation that made her blood run cold, but professional protocol and courthouse hierarchy prevented her from interrupting the judge, even as she recognized the rapidly approaching train wreck that her mentor was orchestrating with each passing second. Through the thick courtroom air charged with tension, anticipation, and the approaching storm, Preston continued his self-satisfied soliloquy, each word another nail in the coffin of his dignity, as he remained blissfully unaware that his carefully constructed world of judicial superiority was about to come crashing down around his ears in spectacular fashion. A small smile played at the corners of Monica's lips as she reached inside her blazer, causing the rookie bailiff to instinctively place his hand on his weapon, but the seasoned court officer beside him noticed something in her stance that made him raise a cautionary hand toward his colleague, while Judge Preston continued his theatrical performance, oblivious to the shifting dynamics in his courtroom. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as Monica's hand moved with deliberate precision, her fingers brushing past the familiar shape of her service weapon to reach for the leather credential holder nestled beside it, years of training evident in every controlled movement, while the rookie bailiff Jimmy Chen's fingers twitched nervously against his holster despite his senior partner's silent warning. The gathered audience held its collective breath, the earlier snickers and whispers dying in their throats as they watched the scene unfold before them like a carefully choreographed dance, the morning sunlight catching the gold thread in Monica's navy blazer as she maintained unwavering eye contact with Judge Preston, who continued his monologue, now completely unaware that the power in his courtroom was about to shift dramatically. Veteran bailiff Anderson recognized the telltale signs of professional training in Monica's movements, his mind flashing back to his days providing courthouse security for federal agents, his experienced eyes noting how she had positioned herself with clear sightlines to all exits while maintaining optimal distance from potential threats, even as she appeared completely at ease to untrained observers. Sarah Matthews, the judge's clerk, had finally managed to decode the cryptic notations in Monica's case file, her face growing increasingly pale as she attempted to catch Judge Preston's attention with subtle coughs and meaningful glances, but the judge remained focused on his performance, his voice rising and falling in practiced cadence as he built toward what he assumed would be another triumphant dismissal of a chastened defendant. Lightning flashed outside the windows, illuminating the courtroom in stark relief as Monica's hand emerged from her blazer, moving with the kind of fluid grace that comes only from countless hours of practice, the leather wallet she held catching the light in a way that made several observers lean forward in their seats, their instincts telling them they were about to witness something extraordinary. The ancient wooden floorboards creaked beneath Monica's feet as she shifted her weight, almost imperceptibly preparing for the revelation to come, her face maintaining its composed expression, even as Judge Preston launched into another exaggerated explanation about traffic safety, his voice bouncing off the courthouse walls like a fading echo from a world about to be turned upside down. Lady Wilson's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine, her 40 years of court reporting experience telling her that something unprecedented was about to unfold in Courtroom 7B. Her arthritis, forgotten as she prepared to document what her instincts told her would become courthouse legend for years to come. The storm outside grew closer, the thunder now, a continuous rolling growl that seemed to underscore the tension building in the courtroom as Monica held the leather wallet with both hands, her thumbs positioned to flip it open in the smooth, practiced motion that had become second nature through years of service in the nation's most elite protective detail. Judge Preston paused in his monologue, finally registering something different in the atmosphere of his courtroom, his steel-gray eyes narrowing slightly as he noted the changed expressions on familiar faces, the strange stillness that had fallen over his usually responsive audience, and the steady, unflinching gaze of the woman before him who somehow seemed to have grown taller, more authoritative in the past few moments. "Your Honor," Monica spoke in a crisp, commanding tone that instantly silenced the gallery. "Perhaps before we continue, you should review my credentials as a special agent of the United States Secret Service, currently assigned to the Presidential Protective Division." She withdrew her badge with practiced precision, the gold shield catching the morning light and commanding every eye in the room. The transformation in the courtroom was instantaneous, as if someone had sucked all the oxygen from the air, the earlier sounds of whispers and shuffling papers vanishing into a void of absolute silence. Even the storm outside seemed to pause in anticipation as the gold shield gleamed beneath the fluorescent lights, its presidential seal and intricate detailed work marking it as unmistakably authentic. Judge Preston's face underwent a fascinating series of transformations as his brain processed what his eyes were seeing, his customary mask of judicial superiority cracking, then shattering as the implications of his previous behavior crashed over him like a tidal wave. While Sarah Matthews, his clerk, clutched the case files to her chest, as if they might shield her from the unfolding catastrophe. Bailiff Anderson relaxed his stance, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he watched the scene unfold, his years of experience allowing him to appreciate the perfect execution of what he would later describe to his colleagues as the most elegant takedown he had witnessed in 4 decades of courthouse service, while beside him rookie bailiff Chen stared open-mouthed at the credentials that marked their holder as a member of the nation's most elite law enforcement agency. Monica maintained her professional bearing as she held her credentials at the perfect angle for inspection, her stance reminiscent of countless presidential protection details where she had stood guard over the world's most powerful leaders, her training evident in every controlled movement as she prepared to deliver the final blow to Judge Preston's crumbling facade. The gallery had become a tableau of frozen expressions as the regular courthouse observers who had come expecting their usual morning entertainment found themselves instead witnessing what would surely become courthouse legend. Several of the young legal interns who had been snickering earlier, now sat perfectly still, their faces masks of horrified realization. Through the bulletproof windows, streams of sunlight broke through the storm clouds, illuminating Monica like a spotlight on a stage as she continued to speak, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had stood in the Oval Office, coordinated with foreign security services, and earned her place in the nation's most prestigious protective detail, while Judge Preston seemed to physically shrink behind his bench. Sarah Matthews had begun frantically scanning the classified briefing documents that had accompanied Monica's case file, her legal training allowing her to understand the gravity of what she was reading about ongoing protective operations, counterterrorism surveillance, and threat assessment protocols that were far beyond the scope of a simple traffic court. The veteran court reporter Gladys Wilson typed with renewed vigor, capturing every word of what she already knew would be the most requested transcript in courthouse history, her experienced fingers flying across the keys as she documented the moment when Judge William Hanging Harry Preston finally met his match in a defendant who was far more than she appeared. A low murmur began to build in the gallery as the initial shock wore off and the implications of the scene began to sink in. Monica stood unwavering, her badge still displayed her presence, commanding the kind of attention that came from years of protecting presidents and foreign dignitaries while managing complex security operations across the globe. Time seemed to stretch like elastic as the judge struggled to reconcile his previous behavior with the reality before him, his earlier condescension evaporating like morning mist as he faced someone whose daily responsibilities included protecting the leader of the free world and investigating threats to national security, creating a silence so profound that everyone in courtroom 7B could hear the slow tick of the ancient wall clock marking each excruciating second. The transformation in Judge Preston's demeanor was instant and absolute, the color draining from his face so rapidly that his clerk took an unconscious step forward. The badge in Monica's hand seemed to radiate authority as several phones emerged from the gallery before the bailiff shut down the attempted photos with a stern gesture. Beads of sweat appeared on the judge's forehead as the weight of his previous condescension came crashing down around him, his Harvard ring catching the light as his hand trembled slightly by reaching for the water glass that had sat untouched throughout his earlier performance, the crystal making a soft clicking sound against his teeth as he tried to compose himself. Sarah Matthews watched in fascinated horror as her mentor, a man who had spent decades crafting his image as the unassailable authority in courtroom 7B, seemed to physically deflate before her eyes, his shoulders hunching, his chest caving as if trying to make himself as small as possible, while she clutched the now decoded case files, understanding the full scope of what they had unwittingly stumbled into. The regular courthouse observers who had gathered for their daily entertainment sat in stunned silence as they witnessed the mighty Judge Preston, legendary for his cutting remarks and theatrical pronouncements, reduced to a stammering shadow of himself. Several of the young attorneys who had been taking notes on his technique earlier now hurriedly scratching out their observations. Bailiff Anderson maintained his professional demeanor, though his eyes sparkled with appreciation for the poetic justice unfolding before him, remembering countless defendants who had withered under Preston's theatrical abuse, while beside him Officer Chen continued to stare at Monica with a mixture of awe and professional respect, having never seen a Secret Service badge up close before. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Preston jump visibly in his seat, his usual commanding presence evaporating like morning mist as Monica continued to stand perfectly still, her badge held at precisely the correct angle, the morning light catching the gold presidential seal in a way that seemed to amplify its authority, while the judge fumbled with his reading glasses, nearly dropping them onto his leather blotter. The ancient courtroom walls seemed to lean in as if they too were witnessing a historic moment, the portraits of stern-faced judges from centuries past looking down from their gilt frames as one of their contemporary members faced a reckoning that would surely become part of courthouse legend, their painted eyes appealing to judge the judge himself. Gladys Wilson, the court reporter, allowed herself a small smile as her fingers flew across the stenotype keys, capturing every excruciating moment of Preston's downfall for posterity, knowing that this transcript would be requested and read for years to come by courthouse staff who had long tired of the judge's theatrical abuse of defendants. Through the windows, the storm clouds had begun to clear, allowing sharp rays of sunlight to pierce the courtroom like spotlights, illuminating the scene as if it were center stage. Preston's hand shook as he tried to straighten his bow tie, a nervous habit that had replaced his usual confident preening, while Monica's unwavering gaze held him pinned like a butterfly in a display case. The gallery had become a study in suspended animation as lawyers, interns, and regular citizens leaned forward in their seats, not daring to make a sound as they watched the judge's carefully constructed world of superiority crumble before the quiet authority of a woman he had so grievously underestimated. Several observers exchanging glances that clearly communicated their satisfaction at witnessing this moment of perfect karma. Sarah Matthews had begun gathering the case files with trembling hands, her mind already racing ahead to damage control scenarios as she realized that news of this encounter would spread through the legal community like wildfire. Her carefully cultivated position as clerk to the powerful Judge Preston suddenly seeming far less advantageous than it had appeared that morning. Special Agent Thompson proceeded to present documentation signed by her supervisor, confirming she had been tracking a credible threat to her protectee on the day in question, operating under established protocols for protective surveillance, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to briefing cabinet members and foreign dignitaries. The papers she produced from her briefcase bore the distinctive watermarks and security features of classified federal documents, their official seals, and carefully worded language, transforming the simple traffic stop into something far more complex as she methodically laid out the circumstances that had brought her to this moment, her movements precise and economical, like everything else about her. Sarah Matthews, who had spent her law school years dreaming of working with classified documents, found herself mesmerized by the level of security clearance evident in the paperwork before them. Whole paragraphs redacted with precise black lines, names and locations carefully obscured to protect ongoing operations while still providing enough detail to establish the legitimacy of Agent Thompson's actions. Through the windows, the storm had begun to clear, much like the confusion in Courtroom 7B, as Monica explained how her team had been conducting counter-surveillance on a subject of interest who had exhibited concerning behavior near a protectee's planned route. Her description, carefully omitting classified details while painting a clear picture of the vital nature of her work. Bailiff Anderson found himself standing straighter, unconsciously responding to the command presence that now filled the courtroom as Monica detailed the complex choreography of presidential protection, the subtle signs and signals that had led her team to identify and track potential threats while maintaining the delicate balance between security and discretion. The gallery sat in rapt attention as Monica's explanation transformed their understanding of the seemingly ordinary streets they drove every day, revealing the hidden world of protective surveillance that operated in plain sight, the complex calculations and risk assessments that went into keeping the nation's leaders safe while maintaining an appearance of normalcy. Judge Preston, whose face had progressed through several shades of pale, now sat perfectly still as Monica referenced specific executive orders and federal statutes that governed her actions, her knowledge of the law demonstrating a depth of expertise that challenged his own, while her calm professional demeanor made his earlier condescension seem even more egregious. The morning sunlight now streamed fully through the windows, creating a natural spotlight on the documentation spread across the judge's bench, each page bearing the weight of federal authority that seemed to grow heavier by the moment, while Preston struggled to maintain his composure beneath the crushing weight of his earlier behavior. Lady Wilson's fingers danced across her stenotype keys with renewed purpose as she captured every word of Monica's explanation, knowing that this transcript would be studied by young law students and courthouse staff for years to come, a textbook example of professional grace under pressure and the consequences of unchecked judicial arrogance. Several of the young attorneys in the gallery had abandoned any pretense of casual observation, now openly taking notes as Monica demonstrated a masterclass in professional presentation, her every word and gesture reflecting years of training and experience, while providing a stark contrast to the theatrical performances they had been studying earlier. The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed from its earlier circus like environment to something approaching a high level security briefing. As Monica continued her explanation, the regular observers sitting up straighter unconsciously responding to her authority, while the morning light caught the edge of her badge, which remained visible as a subtle reminder of her position. Sarah Matthews found herself mentally revising her career plans as she watched Monica command the courtroom, her previous ambition to clerk for a federal judge suddenly seeming less appealing than the possibility of serving her country in a more direct capacity, while beside her Judge Preston seemed to shrink further into his chair with each precisely delivered word. A pin drop silence fell over the courtroom as Monica explained how she had been running counter surveillance against a known threat group. When the ticket was issued, every person in the gallery leaned forward, straining to catch her words as she revealed a glimpse into the hidden world of presidential protection, while the judge's earlier mockery hung in the air like a lead weight. The morning light, now streaming through the windows, illuminated Monica as she professionally detailed the complex security operation that had been unfolding on their city streets that day. Her measured words painting a picture of coordinated teams tracking potential threats, analyzing patterns, and maintaining protective bubbles around high-value protectees while appearing completely invisible to the average citizen. Sarah Matthews found herself furiously taking notes as Monica described the intricate layers of security that surrounded presidential movements, the countless hours of advance work, the careful coordination with local law enforcement, and the split-second decisions that could mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. Her previous understanding of law enforcement suddenly seeming naive and limited. Bailiff Anderson nodded almost imperceptibly as Monica referenced specific security protocols, his own military training, allowing him to appreciate the level of precision and dedication required for such operations, while beside him Officer Chen listened with growing respect as she explained how protective details maintained their cover while conducting high-stakes surveillance in plain sight. The regular courthouse observers who had come expecting their usual morning entertainment instead found themselves receiving a masterclass in executive protection as Monica described how her team had identified, analyzed, and neutralized potential threats that day using techniques and technologies that seemed drawn from the pages of a thriller while carefully omitting classified details that could compromise future operations. Judge Preston sat motionless behind his bench, his earlier theatrical flourishes forgotten as Monica outlined the various federal statutes, executive orders, and international agreements that governed protective operations, her command of legal precedent matching or exceeding his own, while her practical experience in applying these laws in life or death situations added a weight to her words that no amount of judicial posturing could match. Through the windows, the last of the storm clouds had cleared, leaving a brilliant blue sky that seemed to mirror the clarity Monica brought to the complexity of her work, her explanation transforming the ordinary streets and buildings of their city into a sophisticated chessboard where protectors and potential threats moved in an elaborate dance of surveillance and counter-surveillance. Several of the young lawyers in the gallery had abandoned any pretense of professional distance, now openly recording every detail as Monica referenced specific cases and precedents that they had studied at law school, bringing these abstract concepts to life with real-world examples that would never appear in their textbooks, her words carrying the authority of someone who had lived these scenarios. The veteran court reporter Gladys Wilson, whose fingers had captured decades of testimony, found herself completely absorbed in Monica's explanation, nearly missing several keystrokes as she described the sophisticated techniques used to identify and track persons of interest while maintaining operational security, her description offering a rare glimpse into a world that most citizens never knew existed. Sarah Matthews watched her mentor Judge Preston seemingly age years in his chair as Monica detailed the various federal agencies and task forces involved in protective operations that day. Her casual references to high-level coordination meetings and classified briefings, making his daily traffic court performance seem increasingly small and provincial by comparison. Time seemed to stand still in courtroom 7B as Monica continued her explanation, the morning sunlight catching the edge of her badge, which remained visible on her blazer, a constant reminder of the authority behind her words, while the gathered audience sat transfixed, learning more about real-world law enforcement in these few minutes than they had in years of procedural dramas and courthouse observations. In a voice notably lacking its previous condescension, Judge Preston dismissed the citation and hastily called for the next case as Monica gathered her documents and strode confidently from the courtroom, leaving behind a gallery of impressed observers and one thoroughly humbled judge, her heels clicking against the marble floor, creating a rhythm that sounded like justice being served. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the courtroom in a golden glow, as if nature itself was highlighting the historic moment when the mighty Judge William Hanging Harry Preston had finally met his match. His usual commanding presence deflated into something almost unrecognizable as he struggled to regain his composure while Monica methodically collected her classified documents from his bench. Sarah Matthews watched her mentor fumble with his gavel, nearly dropping it twice before managing to call the next case, her career aspirations shifting dramatically as she observed the stark contrast between Preston's theatrical authority and the quiet commanding presence of Special Agent Thompson, who had demonstrated real power without any need for dramatic flourishes or condescending performances. The gallery remained unusually quiet as Monica prepared to leave. Several of the young attorneys who had come to study Preston's technique, now furiously revising their notes, while the regular courthouse observers exchanged knowing looks, understanding they had just witnessed something that would become legendary in the annals of Courtroom 7B history. Bailiff Anderson stepped forward to open the heavy wooden doors for Monica, offering a crisp professional nod that acknowledged one professional to another, while beside him, Officer Chen stood at attention, his previous nervousness replaced by obvious respect as Monica passed by, her badge now secured, but her authority still radiating from every precisely controlled movement. The sound of Monica's departing footsteps echoed through the courthouse corridor, creating a percussive counterpoint to the whispers that had already begun to spread through the building as courthouse staff, who had heard fragments of the encounter, rushed to share the story of how the infamous Judge Preston had finally encountered someone whose authority exceeded his own. Judge Preston attempted to call the next case, his voice cracking slightly as he tried to resume his usual judicial demeanor, but the damage was done. The carefully crafted facade of superiority had cracked beyond repair as the remaining defendants and attorneys in the gallery watched him with new eyes, seeing not the fearsome Hanging Harry, but a man whose power was merely ceremonial compared to the real authority they had just witnessed. Lady Wilson allowed herself a small satisfied smile as she prepared her stenotype machine for the next case, knowing that her transcript of this morning's events would become required reading for courthouse staff and local law students, a perfect record of the day when justice was served not by judicial theatrics, but by quiet professional competence. The morning light continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the now empty space where Monica had stood as the regular business of traffic court attempted to resume, but something fundamental had changed in courtroom 7B. The air itself seemed different, as if Monica's presence had cleared away years of accumulated pretense and pomposity, leaving behind a new standard against which all future performances would be measured. Sarah Matthews gathered her files, her mind already composing the letter of resignation that would begin her journey toward a different kind of public service, inspired by the example of quiet authority and professional dedication she had witnessed while beside her Judge Preston sat in unusual silence, his legendary wit and theatrical flourishes seemingly evaporated in the wake of his encounter with real power. Through the open doors, the sounds of the courthouse, returning to its normal rhythm, drifted into courtroom 7B, but the space would never be quite the same, the ghost of this morning's encounter lingering in the air like a subtle reminder that true authority needs no theatrical flourishes or condescending performances to make its presence felt.